All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 327. And today, uh, I was scrolling the Reddit and I found something that I think all of you will be fairly interested in. First things first, if you haven't picked up your copy of The Hearth Witch's Guide to Magic and Murder, book one of the Hemlock Saga, written by USA Today best-selling author Kiri, links are in the description down below. I get nothing from this. This is not sponsored. I don't get any money from it. This is not an affiliate link or anything like that. It's literally just Barnes & Noble and Amazon. I like Kiri. I like the books. I want people to read her books. All right, so I was scrolling through the Reddits. I know it's a dangerous thing to do, but I am a professional. And by professional, I mean I have far too much time on my hands. And am very arrogant. So, I came across, well, I'm going to be honest here. I belong to a subreddit called D&D Circle Jerk, and it's basically just posts of people making fun of posts from other TTRPG subreddits, and it's basically take a subject to an absurd end to show just how nonsense it is. And so I found this post that I thought was really interesting because it's effectively just someone complaining about not being excited to DM. And I was reading it. One of the things you do in this subreddit is you modify stuff to make it funnier. And I decided, well, this doesn't seem real. Like, obviously, this person has put some stuff in here to parody it. I want to read the base one, and they had a link to the original post. So I went to the original post, and they actually didn't really change that much. But it did kind of inspire me to make a video about this, because this is literally why I do... this is literally why I do Daily December, is the problems that this person is having are problems that I deal with to this day. And Daily December is one of the best ways to deal with it. So I'm going to actually read their original post. And I'll leave a link to their original post, not the parody one, but the actual original post, if you guys want to read it yourselves. But it does highlight some things that some GMs can struggle with. And so I figure, this will be a great kind of topic for us to kind of talk about. So, the post itself is called "I Used to Love DMing. Now I hate it. Here's why." I've been DMing since 2019, and I honestly don't know what's happened to me anymore. I used to be hungry to run games. I wasn't even good back then, but the novelty and the challenge kept me thinking, I'll get better, I'll reach that level, the struggle was fun. Now, I am better. Players tell me my games are fun, they're engaging, they enjoy my stories, and I'm the one sitting there feeling like nothing, just boredom. It's like I'm following a blueprint: set up foreshadowing, drop hooks, structure scenes, keep pacing, hit beats, wrap up. Execute, 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 and that's it. I've tried changing genres. Dark fantasy, bored. Low fantasy, bored. High fantasy, fine, but still nothing that impressive. And 5.5 is just like 5. Okay, you're stronger now, but what? I thought maybe I wanted higher stakes, or lower stakes, or more emotional investment from players, or less. Or maybe I wanted them to be more proactive and co-author the world with me. But half my group doesn't really know how to take agency and engage with the plot in ways that tell a story of their own character. And one player pretty much always prefers a railroad. So trying to force agency just feels bad. I don't even know what I'm seeking anymore. I just know that DMing used to feel alive even when I sucked at it. And now that I'm competent, it feels dead. I can still design stories that get players excited. Honestly, I'm the best DM I know, but I can't get myself excited. It's not burnout. I've taken breaks. It's not system fatigue. I've changed systems, particularly Shadow Dark and Fabula Ultima. It's not even genre boredom. I've tried multiple, maybe with the exception of epic fantasy. It feels like I've solved DMing in a way that removed the fun. No challenge, no discovery, just running a machine I built. Even when I improvise, I'm always so mentally aware of each and every trope and beat I'm employing and how the players will react, so all I see is just the reactivity of the players. But I want interesting themes instead. Well, I think. I don't even know that much at this point anymore. Has anyone else gone through this? What did you do? Because the only solution I see for me is to switch to being a player. And I'm not even sure about it, because I often notice the mistakes that other DMs make, and it secretly irks me a little bit. Is this just a phase, or is this a sign that my brain wants a different kind of creativity now? Any perspective helps. I'm genuinely lost. They do have one edit. I've also changed player group and took a break recently. I'd last DM'd December 2024. Been in a new group now for 2 weeks. Former group disbanded. I'm currently DMing for said group, comprising a more experienced player I know and some total newcomers to the hobby, slowly but surely converting and easing them into TTRPGs right now with 5.5e. So, let's talk about this. The first thing that I see in this is, for lack of a better term, and this is not meant to be some sort of attack against the the poster, or anything like that. But I do see a lot of arrogance here. And what I mean by that is they started DMing in 2019. They stopped DMing in 2024, end of 2024. So absolute max, they have been DMing for 5 years. And as far as I can see, in that 5 years, they have DM'd exclusively for either a single group or a very small selection of people to play with, and they've gotten burnt out. They claim that it's not a burnout. This is 100% a burnout. And so where I get the arrogance from is this idea of, well, I've been doing this for 5 years, and I can do all these things. I can foreshadow, I can drop story hooks, I can structure scene, keep pacing, hit beats. I do all the things you're supposed to do when you're a dungeon master. No. Some of those things are useful tools for a dungeon master or a game master in general, but those are not the things that you have to do as a dungeon master. Like, that's if I'm training a new dungeon master, my first lesson for them is not going to be, okay, this is how you foreshadow, or this is how you structure things to be able to get out at the right time. Those are very, very useful skills, and depending on where you're dungeon mastering, those might be essential skills. If you're doing things like convention content, you have to stick to a clock. There is no, we can go over a little bit. No, anytime you go over by any amount when you are playing in a convention setting, you are impacting a lot of other people. You're impacting your players because they may have other tables that they're supposed to get to, and those tables either have to start without players or have to start late now. The table you are currently physically using might have to be used for another person, and there's a good chance that if you're running games at a convention, you're not just running one game at a convention. You will have another table that you're supposed to get to. So, the idea of, keeping time, like, all of those things are very useful tools. But the real job of a dungeon master or a game master is to create a world that the players are excited to tell their own story in. And from what I'm reading here, you don't do that. I guess I'm not talking to them specifically. This particular person doesn't actually do that. What they do is they have learned how to tell a very particular kind of story using a very specific set of tools. And telling the same story over and over and over again gets very, very boring very quickly. Now, they do mention about, well, my players don't want to take agency. That's the idea of having to force them to take agency isn't how tabletop role-playing games work. Like, you can't force someone to take agency. That's a contradiction in terms. Taking agency is them themselves making decisions, and you can't force someone to make their own decisions. You can force people to do what you tell them, but that in and of itself is not forcing them to make a decision. They have to make their own decision. And then the other kind of glaring thing that was made fun of in the parody post, I've tried different genres: dark fantasy, bored; low fantasy, bored; high fantasy, bored. And then they went further and said, you know, I could even try a completely crazy genre, like epic fantasy. Well, there's a through line there. Fantasy. And specifically, like, fantasy in and of itself is an extremely broad genre. That's why we have dark fantasy and high fantasy and all those other things. And all the ones that he has described here are very, I guess, Tolkien-esque, depending on which part of Tolkien's works that you're looking at. All of them are very, very closely related to one particular style of storytelling. And tabletop RPGs have such a massive breadth of different stories that they can tell, even within the fantasy genre. Like, fairy tales are a version of fantasy that are very, 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 very different than something like Tolkien. You can have modern fantasy, like The Hearthwitch's Guide to Magic and Murder. You can start playing with steampunk fantasy if you want to go into more an Eberron style thing. And then the various versions of punk, solar punk, steampunk. I can't remember. There was another one that I just saw recently that I thought was really interesting, and I'd never realized it was his own kind of version. And then you have, like, strictly not fantasy that hasn't been talked about here at all. You have various versions of science fiction. You have modern style games. Things like, Power Rangers and G.I. Joe are both kind of blends of modern and sci-fi stuff. You have TTRPGs like Modern Age. And the Fate system works remarkably well in a modern setting. You can go for different periods of time. If you go for more Eastern historical settings, setting a game in feudal Japan, or the Three Kingdoms era of China, or even more fun, something set in like folklore, inspired by like Chinese folklore, like, Journey to the West, and the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is more like historical fantasy than it is folklore. But Journey to the West, very, very folklore inspired. Japanese folklore. We have African folklore. You could even have European folklore that is just not quite as often explored. Things like, a really good example, the Witcher games. basically take a lot of like Polish historical folklore in them and are kind of representative of Polish culture. And for anyone that doesn't know, the Polish people in general have not been treated very well throughout history. There are specific there are specific, I can't remember the word I'm thinking of. Slurs, there's the thing. There's specific slurs specifically for Polish people. There were periods in history where you would see signs that would say things like Poles don't apply and stuff like that. The Irish had that a little bit too in the turn of the century U.S. Irish were discriminated against for a while. But even in Europe, Polish people tend to be the people that get shit on the most. So yeah, The Witcher was all about kind of celebrating Polish culture and folklore and things like that. So what I'm seeing here is someone effectively what I'm seeing here is what's it? The Dunning-Kruger effect. If you're not familiar with the term, Dunning-Kruger effect refers to this phenomenon where once you get a little bit of knowledge on a subject, your feeling of expertise grows exponentially to a point. And then once you reach that point of a little bit more knowledge, it starts dropping tremendously. And then as you actually become an expert, it gets slowly up to your feeling of how expert you are in this as a subject. The interesting thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect is if you are truly an expert, generally those people that know barely like maybe 5 to 10% of the subject matter that you are now an expert at, they will still feel that they are more of an expert in their mind than you feel in your mind. And that's what this feels like to me, is like a really perfect example of a Dunning-Kruger effect, is they learned a decent amount. Part of the Dunning-Kruger effect is not just I read a single book, it's I have done study, and I can't remember where the cutoff point is for the Dunning-Kruger effect, but I've always thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10% of expertise. I don't know if that's true, that's just where it's always been in my mind. So they learn a pretty decent amount, and in this particular instance, it looks like they know Dungeons and Dragons relatively well, but they have only ever explored, as far as I can tell, Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons adjacent games, and the fantasy genre, and that's it. And so they feel that they've seen absolutely everything. Again, that Dunning-Kruger thing. And they're, it's like, there are no more, mountains to climb. There are no more worlds to explore. And that's really not true in any way, shape, or form. But they've kind of convinced themselves, well, this is how it works. So these are some of the things that they can do. Probably the easiest thing in the world to do is play with different people, because they will approach your game differently. And they've mentioned that they're trying to do that, but that can get very, it can be very difficult finding new people to play with, which is why today's video is sponsored. Nobody sponsors me. Nobody cares about me enough to sponsor me. But if I were to have a sponsor, Start Playing is a way to do that. It costs money, but it is a very simple, very easy way to go about finding new players. The other thing, I say this constantly, go to conventions. I do not know a single convention that will turn someone away that's wanting to run games. You may not be able to get a free ticket unless you run the specific games that they want. And if this guy is really as good at 5th edition as he claims he is, then he will have no problem. He, she, they, whatever they are, they will have no problem getting work at a convention, bare minimum for a free ticket. I know most conventions, at least I used to go to, you could get a free ticket for running like 3 or 4 games. Like, it really wasn't that big of an investment. And then to get room and board and stuff like that, then you were spending significant more time. But just for a free game, like you could do that pretty simple and pretty easy, or a free ticket. You do that pretty simple, pretty easy, and then you can just go around enjoying the convention, exploring, trying new things. It's one of the best things about conventions, especially specifically tabletop conventions like Origins or Gen Con or Dragon Con. Those are, excuse me, those are really, really big ones. Gen Con is the largest in North America. It may be the largest in the world. I think they still have one in Europe that's larger than Gen Con, but I can't remember. If you live in a place that has a pretty lively tabletop RPG culture, then looking for smaller local conventions works really well. Again, I live in Wisconsin. We literally invented tabletop RPGs, as in Dungeons and Dragons was created in Wisconsin. I can't remember the name of the town. It's right on the border of Illinois. It's not Fond du Lac. I don't know why I always think it's Fond du Lac. Lake Geneva. There we go. Lake Geneva, the old LG. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin is where Dungeons and Dragons was created. We invented tabletop RPGs in Wisconsin. Thank a Wisconsinite the next time you roll a nat 20. We have, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so conventions a year, maybe a couple dozen tabletop conventions in various places around Wisconsin and Illinois. If you don't mind traveling to Wisconsin for a little bit, you can probably hit, if you stay up here for a month, you can probably hit 2 or 3 conventions. Maybe 2 months to take for 2 or 3, because there is a little bit of time between them. But you time it right, you can hit a couple conventions while you're up here. Or if you don't mind traveling back every so often. So convention play is a really, really easy way to learn a brand new style of playing tabletop RPGs. The other thing you can do, Roll20 has a looking for group option. There is an r/LFG on Reddit. There are a lot of different places where you can find new games to play. So this person has claimed that's what they're doing. But I think, again, their problem is going to be they're going to do the same thing with a different group. And having a different group is useful because they're not going to react the exact same way. But with how much they've talked about how their players prefer to be railroaded, I'm going to think that they probably have a very dominant personality. And the people that tend to stay in their games tend to have a relative submissive personality. I'm not talking about anything naughty or anything. Just there are certain people that tend to be more outgoing and tend to have very strong attitudes and opinions and things like that. And then there are people that kind of just enjoy going with the flow. And it doesn't mean that they're a doormat or anything. That's just how they like doing it. They enjoy having someone else make the difficult decisions, and they just kind of get to enjoy themselves. And it sounds like they've exclusively been playing with people like that. And it's very, very possible the reason that they play with people like that is that their personality is so dominant that it immediately turns off any other dominant people, to the point where the only people that can play with them are people that are very submissive and are going to do what they're told. Again, I also get that from this idea of, so trying to force agency just feels bad. Again, you can't force agency, and the idea that you have to implies that you think that you are in complete control, which isn't how any of that stuff works. So that's one way. And again, for Daily December, I literally do this. Part of Daily December is I start, 3 or 4 months before the games actually start, I start sending out emails and messages and things like that to people that I know, people I have like slight connections with, going, hey, I do this thing in December. I play something new. Would you like to play with us? And that's specifically so I can play with different people I've never played with before. It helps keep things fresh. It helps keeps things interesting, and it helps me to learn. That's another thing that I think this particular person might not be the greatest thing in the world at, is learning from other people. It sounds like they are self-taught, which is not a bad thing. I am a self-taught DM. I've self-taught myself a lot of different things, and I'm very, very good at it. But one of the reasons I'm so good at it is I've also learned how to learn from other people. And again, this is an assumption I'm making. I can't say this is that way for sure, but this person genuinely sounds like they don't learn from other people. They simply learn from themselves. Which again, it's not a bad thing to learn from yourself. It's very, very useful skill to have. But the idea that they can't get their players to help them create a world, it's really not all that difficult. Instead of telling them what they see or what they feel, you ask them, how does this make your character feel? What is your character thinking? What does your character see? How do you envision your character doing this? That's one of my favorite things to do because, especially during combat, I narrate. I make combat more interesting than just, oh, you did 10 damage. What do? You also did 10 damage. You know, I'll narrate things like, you guys watch as Aoi takes out her rapier, glistening with lightning energy. As she brings it forward, you watch as the lightning begins to form at the tip, and she thrusts it forward, and you see this huge bolt of lightning go, electrocuting 4 goblins in the way. As the smoke rises, Aoi kind of whips her blade down and blows the smoke off of it and prepares for a second attack. And so sometimes I will literally ask, a player, cast a spell or something, go, how do you envision this spell working? Like, what color do you see your Eldritch Blasts being? Do they take on a particular shape that makes sense? What are you specifically casting it from? Do you cast it from your hand? Do you cast it from your sword? Do you cast it from a magic symbol that you use somewhere on your body? All of those things force the players to think about this more than as a game where they hit the right button to do the right thing, or more than just a game where they hit the button to do the right thing, and more of a storytelling experience. Whenever I have any of my monsters do something, I say why they're doing it. Sometimes I do it in kind of a offhand or kind of jokey way, like, well, this person just saw you completely roast their friend, so they're not happy with you. They're going to run over to you. But even just giving them that idea of these things have motivation and they're going to act on that motivation shows that it's more than just, okay, which one has the highest threat? This one? Okay. Those are all things that will encourage player agency. And that's the only thing you can do is encourage player agency. You can't force it. I mean, theoretically, you can just sit there and go, what do you want to do? And then just stare at them until they say something. Again, that's not really forcing player agency. That's encouraging through torture. Which is really not all that effective. So yeah, the first thing I would say is, maybe try some new players. The second thing, and these two ones can be kind of interchangeable because they both can be done, play it at a different level. What I mean by this, especially for D&D, especially 5th edition, the sweet spot is between around level 3 and level 12. That's why the vast majority of adventures are written for characters between 3 and 12. And the vast majority of games end somewhere around level 10, 11, or 12. If you really want to change how you feel about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, run a high-level campaign. Start the characters out at tier 4, or run a pre-written high-level adventure. It is a completely different game. Now, something that players in similar situations to the one that was described in the Reddit here run into is it feels like the players are invincible and there's nothing you can do to challenge them. And that's because their idea of challenging them is put lots of big monsters in front of them and hope that one of the big monsters kills one of them. That is not a challenge for high-level D&D. I bring this up all the time because it's where I learned it. In D&D 4th edition, there are 3 tiers of adventure. There's what's called the heroic tier. That's from levels 1 to level 10. That is roughly equivalent to tier 1 and most of tier 2 levels of play in D&D 5th edition. 5th edition has 4 tiers of play. Tier 1 is 1 to 4, 2 is 5 to 10, 3 is 11 to 16, 4 is 17 to 20. The second tier of 4th edition is called Epic tier, and it's called that because at level 11 you get to choose what's called an Epic Destiny. It's kind of like a subclass, but the interesting thing about it is Epic Destinies, there are ones that are limited to certain classes. You have to be a certain class to choose this Epic Destiny. But there are also Epic Destinies that are linked specifically to power sources, like there are Arcane Epic Destinies or Primal Epic Destinies, which is their version of like Nature Magic, or Psionic Epic Destinies, where anyone that's using a class that uses that power source can take that Epic Destiny. There are Epic Destinies that are tied to races. There are Epic Destinies that are just generic. And so it really allowed for kind of creative class builds. And so the Epic tier in D&D 4th edition was where you first started learning, okay, the idea of just sending powerful creatures against my players is not the best way to do it. And you have to start getting more intricate with your challenge designs and the things like that. And the equivalent of Epic tier is like second half of tier 2 and tier 3 is your Epic tier. For the third tier in D&D 4th edition, it was called, that was called Paragon. I'm sorry. Second tier is called Paragon because you choose your Paragon path. Third tier is called Epic because you choose your Epic Destiny. And again, Epic Destinies work similarly. Excuse me. And I literally just spilt on myself. My word. Fun. Water. All right. So, Epic tier is level 21 to 30. And the thing about Epic Destinies is almost every single one got a get out of death free card. One of my favorites, one of the kind of generic Epic Destinies you could choose was Future Hero. Basically, your character in the future does this really impressive, amazing thing and saves reality. Because of that, the future version of you is heavily invested on the current version of you becoming the future version. And so it has ability, I think you get it at either level 1 or level 20 or level 21 or 23. Can't remember which. But basically, when you drop to 0 hit points, which isn't dead, but it's unconscious and you can start dying at that point. Instead of going to 0 hit points, your future self teleports back in time and takes your place for a brief amount of time to ensure that you live long enough to get to the end. And they are a super-powered version of you. It is literally a get out of death free card. So the idea of challenging epic level characters with just real hard boss fights was just not a thing. Because you had to kill every single character probably 2 or 3 times, because there would also be the ability to resurrect them and all these other things. Like there's lots of stuff you could do in 4th edition. And so your combat encounters, the lose condition cannot be you die. It can't be that, because that will never happen. So you have to start getting more creative. Well, there's a skills challenge involved in it, and if you fail the skills challenge, then the bad guy is able to eclipse the sun and become invincible, and, covers the land in a rain of darkness. Something like that. Or, there is this huge, like, elemental force that's coming to wipe out this town, and so you need to evacuate as much of the people as you can. And failure means there's not enough people to continue the world running. Things like that. So I would almost guarantee that this person, that their approach to combat design is, how many really tough things can I make to get rid of their hit points. To give you another good example, again, I'm prepping for my December campaign, which is going to use, do you want to, for Pete's sake, come on. There. Having a tremor in the hand that you use your mouse with sucks. Because I will double click on things, but then I will move in between the double clicks, and it will screw stuff up. All right, let me see if I can find it in here. Let's destroy the thing. There we go. So, and they have an entire sections, page 279 on the Draw Steel Heroes book. Fuck me. Dear Lord. Pardon my language, but this is not fun. Alright, so, end of combat. How combat ends. They have a bunch of different ways to end combat. Basically, these are the win conditions. So, objective endings. Things like diminish numbers. That's your normal one. Defeat a specific foe. That's another one that can be really, really interesting for players if you still want it to be very kill the bad guy focused. Is effectively you have a single bad guy that they have to take out. Everything else about the combat encounter revolves around making this person difficult to kill. So they're constantly calling in reinforcements. The terrain itself maybe will change, or there will be shields or things like that makes it difficult to get to this character. That requires a very different approach than diminish numbers, because it's not just use my most powerful attack that does the most damage. Because if there are shields that you have to deactivate in a certain way, then hitting them really hard might not be the best use of your abilities, or might not be effective at all. It might be that you have to move to a very particular place where the battery for the shield is, or you have to cut a rope that's holding a counterweight in place so that this massive like iron door is moved aside. Other endings. Get the thing. Have a particular thing that you have to get for the characters. And again, that will give you a completely different set of abilities that are going to be useful. Mobility is key in a get the thing situation. Destroy the thing. Again, another thing that can be even more fun, because if it is a small enough thing, then enemies can pick up the thing and run with it. And then when they're getting close to death, they can send it to another enemy. And that allows for a completely different set of skills to be useful. Save another is another ending. You have to actually protect someone. You have to save someone. That's another one that gets very, very interesting, especially if it also turns into either an escort is the next thing that they talk about. We have to take someone from one place to another, or something from one place to another with an onslaught of bad things happening. Or a hold them off encounter where in order to save this person, you have to protect them long enough for reinforcements to arrive or for the sun to come up. Maybe you're fighting against, undead, and they are just trying their hardest to get to the final stronghold of the light, and all you have to do is hold them off until sunrise. That is a very, very different situation and can create some very interesting ideas. Assault the defenses. You flip it over. The bad guys have this stronghold and you need to be able to get into it somehow. And so you have to find a way to get into it, whether that's a single place or, if you really want to get tricky, have multiple locations that need to be assaulted simultaneously or need to have something happen simultaneously in them. That will create a very interesting situation for the players, because if they have to split the party in order to do things, that's really cool. Stop the action. This is the one I described before. There's something going on. There's a ritual. There's an execution going on. Something is going on that you have to stop. If you don't do it fast enough, or you don't do it in the right way, it will go off and that will change everything. The other side of that coin, complete the action. You need to complete something important. Get a ritual going. Complete building something. Complete a puzzle, something like that in the middle of combat. All of those things are very, very interesting, and they will force the players to play differently, and they will force you as a dungeon master to plan differently, and they will feel different. Hold please, I have to change the view so I can see the things the way they're supposed to. Again, if I were to take a guess based on what is said here, it really sounds like this person has learned to play kind of the generic version of D&D. They go to a tavern, they get a quest, the end of the quest has a boss fight, they beat the boss, they go back, rinse, repeat. It's not to say that that's not fun. There are a lot of people, probably their players, that really enjoy this. But it's getting obvious that the DM doesn't like that kind of formulaic version of Dungeons and Dragons. So just by putting in different objectives and things like that, putting puzzles into the game, that will massively change. One thing that I haven't seen them talk about in any way, shape, or form is puzzles. They really haven't gone into specific detail of what they do to challenge their players. They've just said, well, I tell engaging stories. Okay, well, how do you tell those stories? Have you tried mystery style stories where something happens and the players have to figure out what happened? That requires player agency, quote unquote, because they can't find out anything unless they actively do something. You can give them hooks and things like that where, somebody goes, oh, well, I think the baker saw something happen, and you can kind of direct them where to go, but they still have to put the pieces together. All of these things change how even just Dungeons and Dragons, if you are, exclusive to, no, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. I don't want to play Starfinder, which is Dungeons and Dragons in space. I don't want to play, Vampire the Masquerade, which is not Dungeons and Dragons. I get it. Some people, this is their game, and that's what they want to play. It's perfectly fine, but there are so many ways. Again, the system that I am running was a Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting that plays nothing like Dungeons and Dragons. So you can bend and mold D&D to do a lot of different things. If you specifically like 5th edition, there's a version called Esper Genesis. It's created using the open game license, but it's D&D in space. So if you still like Dungeons and Dragons, but you want to try sci-fi, Esper Genesis is a good way to do it. There's a bunch of other ones. Esper Genesis, I would say, is probably the one with the highest production value that I have seen. And I own one of the books. I don't know which. I don't know if I own multiple right now, but I do know I own some of Esper Genesis, and it's a competent system if you want to play D&D in space, and it works a hell of a lot better than just reskinning, orcs as space orcs. So yeah, those kind of two suggestions are built entirely around the idea of, no, I'm going to continue playing D&D. So either play it in a different way via playing with new people or playing it in a new place, or play it in a different way by changing how you challenge your players. Both of those can be done in D&D. The other thing that you can do, which again is why Daily December has turned into what it is play a completely new system. I was a little bit surprised when they mentioned that they tried Fabula Ultima and we're still like, oh, it's the exact same thing, because Fabula Ultima plays so incredibly differently. But one thing that Fabula Ultima, and I'm going to guess their D&D games, has in common is Fabula Ultima is based on old school JRPGs, which compared to any TTRPG are extremely linear. Even if we talk about JRPGs with a lot of freedom, things like Final Fantasy VII, it is still a very, very linear story. You have to go to specific spots at specific points in the story, and it always leads you to the exact same end. Even if we're talking about something like Chrono Trigger that has, 20 or 30 different endings, it's still very, very linear when you compare it to something like a tabletop RPG. So I would assume that the reason they chose Fabula Ultima is it still allowed them to tell the linear story that they're used to telling, as opposed to trying things more differently. Games that do not run anything like the thing with Fabula Ultima, and I have to assume that either they didn't run a session 0 or it went very, very poorly. Fabula Ultima requires the players to help build the world. Like part of session 0, I have a session 0 Fabula Ultima on this channel. We played Fabula Ultima a couple years ago. And part of session 0 is you have to go to every single player and they create a place in the game. And they have, I'll bring up my Fabula Ultima book here just to kind of give better examples. Fabula Ultima, there we go. So let's go to the core book. So press start. Session 0. World creation. So there is this huge list of questions here that as a game master you could all answer yourself. But it's better if during session 0 you ask the players. And I think I'm inferring based on how they've described themselves here that more likely than not, either they answered all these questions themselves or they very heavily led their players to, like the first one, choose a shape for your world. Is it round, flat, or are there regions floating amidst the cloud? Could it be donut shaped in typical JRPG fashion? You might even decide the shape of the world is yet to be discovered. So they could have just said, well, our world is round. Does that sound good to you guys? And then go through everything. What is the role of magic and technology in your setting? Are you living in an age of industrial development, or is it more Renaissance-like? Is magic seen as a form of science, or mostly as a great mystery? Again, it feels like he probably dictated, or they probably dictated all this. And then They have world creation to the tables. Um, yeah, like when I was running mine, I would specifically go to each player and go, okay, what do you want to create for this world? And I just don't think they did that, and it's probably why Fabula Ultima felt like D&D to this GM. Because again, I've run Fabula Ultima. It plays nothing like Dungeons and Dragons when you do it well. Um, but going further, like Fabula Ultima still uses the same a version of the same initiative system. They use a popcorn initiative, but you can use popcorn initiative in D&D. You know, going further, playing something like a Powered by the Apocalypse game, or playing like Fate is a really, really good example of a game that plays nothing like Dungeons and Dragons. The World of Darkness games play very, very differently and involve a lot more role playing than kind of a standard D&D campaign. I had another one I was thinking of. Playing Lasers and Feelings hacks, or playing Lasers and Feelings, is a great way to play very, very differently, because you don't have all of the tools and everything that you would have in a D&D like game. Like, there isn't a monster manual. There aren't sets. There aren't set things that you have to do. There aren't any maps that you can use or pre-written adventures or anything. It's just collaborative storytelling. So actively working to try different things and not to make them like Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I've recently been seeing some friends of mine playing Daggerheart. Daggerheart's another one that plays very differently from Dungeons and Dragons. And I've seen these people effectively playing Dungeons and Dragons using Daggerheart. And it really kind of upset me, because a lot of the things that make Daggerheart so interesting, they reduce them down to as simple a terminology and ideas they can, so that they can use their D&D terminology and their D&D knowledge to play Daggerheart. And it turned into kind of a really underwhelming experience for both the players and the audience. And again, it's this idea of just not really embracing that, okay, this is different, so it needs to feel different. It needs to be different. Just because I am used to Dungeons and Dragons and they are used to Dungeons and Dragons doesn't mean that we somehow have to make this work like Dungeons and Dragons. This isn't Dungeons and Dragons. It's not supposed to be Dungeons and Dragons. It's supposed to feel different. If you really want a fun one that plays nothing like Dungeons and Dragons, it's a bit niche, but Candela Obscura, I got the book right there. Candela Obscura plays nothing like Dungeons and Dragons. It's not set up in the same way. Nothing about it works in the same way. It is a very, very different game. And then also different genres in general. It's one of the things that Fabula Ultima does so exceptionally well. They have 3 different campaign setting books, effectively. They have high fantasy, natural fantasy, techno fantasy, that allow you to play massively different styles of games. And understanding that, and this is something that I've seen this pitfall trap a lot of DMs, that they have a particular game that they're used to playing in a particular genre. And so they will go into a different genre, whether they're playing a new game or a new system, or they're playing the same system they've always used. They will still treat it the same way. In a high fantasy setting, things are going to work differently. Towns that are, hundreds, if not thousands of miles apart, are going to develop very differently, are going to have very, very different reactions to something happening to them. Whereas in a space setting where you can teleport or you can travel exceptionally fast, you can get around the world in a matter of hours, distance really isn't that big a deal. And that changes how people react to things. The idea of having magic available versus science, it changes how people feel. Governments are very, very different. It doesn't matter what you do for your fantasy government. It's never going to work like the current United States or the current United Kingdom or the European Union or any other united-based place. Or, let's go crazy, a place that's not united, like Brazil, where it's just Brazil. Those places are going to work very, very differently. Their governments work very, very differently. And so setting something in the modern era is going to work differently. And if you try to force it to work the same way it does in Dungeons and Dragons, yes, you can do that, but you're missing the point. So when you do venture out into different systems, different genres, embrace them. Do everything you can to make them not work like the system that you're leaving. And I don't think that was done here. Shadow Dark is not a system I can remember off the top of my head. It sounds familiar. I'm going to look it up. Product of the Year 2024. What is Shadow Dark? Won a bunch of Ennies, but you're not explaining what it does. It has solo rules. See if I can find something. What it's sounding like is they have 4 classes: Fighter, Priest, Thief, Wizard. Yeah, it's a BX clone. So it's old school D&D. Like Shadow Dark is like I've heard it's called BX or BECME. For anyone wondering what BECME stands for, BECME stands for Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, and Immortals, and they were the kind of different flavors of the original version of D&D. They had a basic version, an expert version, which had higher levels. They had a companion that added more stuff. The master level was their high level, and then I think Immortals was the really high end, like unleveled play, I guess you could call it. But yeah, so Shadow Dark is Dungeons and Dragons. So the only non-Dungeons and Dragons game they talk about here anywhere is Fabula Ultima, and you can make Fabula Ultima work like D&D. It's not designed to. It doesn't do it well, which is probably why they didn't feel very good about playing Fabula Ultima, but you can do it. To be perfectly honest, I could make World of Darkness work like did a D&D if you give me enough time. And I think that's the biggest problem that this person has. And a lot of other game masters is once you find your game, you will always try to recreate that feeling when you first started playing it. And one of the ways that a lot of people tend to do that, one of the ways that a lot of people tend to do that is by doing the same things that you did before, thinking they will give you the same results. And that's just not how the world works. The world is built on the idea of diminishing returns. You're not familiar with the term. It's basically doing the same thing but getting a smaller result every time you do it. That's how all of the world works. There's not a single thing in the real world where you can do the exact same thing over and over and over again and always get the same result. You'll always get a lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser version unless you try something different. And that is effectively what is being complained about, is I keep doing the same thing and I'm not getting the same result, and that doesn't make sense to me. Well, because this isn't a science experiment. This is the real world. And doing the same thing over and over and over again gives you diminishing returns. You have to put yourself outside of the box. You know, this person apparently has either never been a player or no, they specifically mentioned being a player and getting mad when, yeah, so here. And I'm not even sure about, because the only solution I see for me is to switch to being a player, and I'm not even sure about it because I often notice the, quote, mistakes that other DMs make, and it secretly irks me a little bit. I don't know if that means that they've watched other DMs like Critical Role or Adventure Zone, Dropout, whatever. And they've gone, oh, well, they made a mistake and I don't like that. And that's another thing that kind of lends me into the idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect on this person. Again, 5 years, especially 5 years for a single group of players, is not enough to consider yourself an expert. In my first 5 years of playing D&D, I had like 1,000 or 2,000 hours playing with a couple hundred different people. That taught me a lot. And in addition to me running games for a couple hundred different people, I also played constantly, as often as I could. I did everything I could to learn everything possible. Only running your custom games, because I don't know if they've ever actually done any pre-written adventures. It's another way that you can learn some cool stuff, is running pre-writtens. I don't know. They don't specifically talk about running pre-written, so they might have, they might not have. Yeah. So again, all this kind of comes back to the idea, this is why I do Daily December. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me excited about running the games that I'm running, and allows me to try new things and learn new things. Daily December started, the first year I did it, just started as me trying to do something I had never done before. I had made videos, and again, the reason I got started in YouTube was I wanted to become a Geek and Sundry vlogger. And I will constantly kind of revisit that point in my life, because it was such a kind of pivot point for my life. Like, everything changed when I made that decision that, well, I want to be a YouTuber and I want to be a Geek and Sundry vlogger. And because of that, I was stuck on the idea of making semi-weekly videos, because that's what the Geek and Sundry vloggers were going to do, or weekly videos. Was, okay, well, I'll do one video a week. That's what you can do. Or one video every other week. That's what the Geek and Sundry vloggers would do. And then when Daily December came around, it's like, well, doing one video every single day, like, that's crazy. I don't know if I could do that. And I did it. My first year, I don't think I actually made it through a Daily December until like my 5th or 6th year, where I actually made a new video every single day for December. I would always have days that I skipped for whatever reason, whether it was because of work or being sick or whatever. And so it took me 6 years to get to the point where I could make a video every day in the month of December. The idea of being an expert dungeon master in 5 years of running primarily for one group, it's not possible. There's just so much that you cannot learn running a single group in a single session or in a single setting. Again, when I was running games, I was running home games, I was running online games, I was running games at game stores, and I was running games at conventions. I was running every single place I possibly could. It was nonsense levels of crazy, but it turned me into an exceptionally skilled dungeon master. And I don't say that with arrogance or anything like that. I have spent a massive portion of my life. I mean, I'm 37. It took me a little bit to remember that. 37. I have been playing D&D since I think, or I've been running games since I think 2013. So we're going on almost 13 years now. So about a little over a quarter of my life, yeah, a little over a quarter of my life, I have been specifically running to the D&D. And before that, I played shit tons of RPGs, and I was a very, let's say, creative child. I was always playing pretend and making up stories. I used to write stories very, very rarely, but like I do creative writing classes and things like that. So I've been doing this for the majority of my life when you count creative writing and acting and all these other things. So yeah, I would say that I'm exceptionally skilled at this particular thing. Um, and the reason that I am is not because I quote unquote taught myself, is because I forced myself to try as many different ways of doing it as possible, of learning from as many different people as I possibly could. I would watch video upon video about how to dungeon master, and I would watch Acquisitions Incorporated and Critical Role and Dice Camera Action and what was it called, Mirror Shades and Roll20 stuff. And I was constantly trying to find out more and learn more, and this person just doesn't seem to be doing that. And that's probably the easiest way to create burnout. So yeah, interested to hear from you guys. First of all, do we have any forever DMs or majority DMs out there? Have you gone through similar situations to this, where D&D started feeling formulaic, or whatever game you play started feeling formulaic, and it was getting hard to kind of motivate yourself to do it? Did you have anything that you did to get you out of that rut? Let me know in the comments down below. From the opposite side, as a player, have you ever gotten into that formulaic rut? Whether it's your DM keeps giving you the same things, or the characters that you keep playing all start feeling the same, even when you play different characters and you actively try to do something different, it always feels like it gets the same. What did you do to get out of that? Or are you still in that rut? Describe the rut that you're in, and maybe someone else in the comments or one of my later videos will talk about ways that you can get out of that rut. Anyway, this is going to be all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right. Bye-bye.